The condition is really crazy condition.
I mean, that shouldn't give away the whole secret to professional windsurfing.
Matteo Iachino giving Antoine Albo a run for his money. Here we go. Woo! What a finish.
The guy is kind of talking bullshit.
The team's just got to work a little harder.
Welcome to the Windsurfing Podcast, back again for episode 3, and this week we have got a guy who has been around the block. Yeah, he's actually been to the Olympics in 1992. He's been there in the glory days of the PBA. He's still currently racing on the PWA. He's got involved with sail design. We're going to hear him talk about some of the big guns, Antoine Albo, Bjorn Dunkerbeck, and we're also going to hear him talk about the future of the PWA and how he sees it going. And it is, of course, the one, the only, El Presidente, Jimmy Diaz.
So Jimmy Diaz, born in Madrid, Spain, Dutch urban mother, Colombian dad, lived and grew up in St. Croix, Virgin Islands, lived in Maui, Gran Canaria, and now Turkey. Dude, how many passports do you own, and how many are you actually eligible for if you want to have them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, it's quite funny because my dad's Colombian, my mother's from Aruba. You know, I guess you could say my family's from the Caribbean basin, actually. You know, and my dad was a chemical engineer, and he went to Spain to do a project, and he ended up staying there for, I think, about 10 years and had 3 kids there, you know. So I was born in Spain, but I don't have any Spanish blood in me. And actually, the funny part is my dad came over to the U.S. from Colombia, and he got naturalized. And then we were born. Then we were automatically American citizens. So I've only ever held a U.S. passport.
How was growing up? Obviously, you grew up in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah.
How was that?
It's an incredible place to grow up in. The people in the Virgin Islands are you know, incredibly nice, friendly people. I couldn't have asked for a better upbringing. Really, you know, it's we ended up going to. I went to a very good school over there. My education was very good. That's where I learned to windsurf. The conditions were unbelievable for that. The whole setting was there, and you know, the place is like the song says. The place is nice. Virgin Islands, nice.
Yeah, I read in an interview, you said there was quite a big scene of windsurfing, which is a little bit surprising. You know, having grown up a couple years later than you know, imagining a place with maybe 50,000 people living and having actually a proper scene.
Yeah, I'm not sure if a big scene is the correct term. You know, I think especially when you're younger, you kind of see things being bigger than what they were. But we had a healthy scene there in St. Croix, and we probably had fleets, I think in the racing fleets, maybe about 30, 40 people just on St. Croix, if that. And then in St. Thomas, St. John, and in Tortola and Virgin Gorge, in the British Virgin Islands, it was more. So whenever we would have both just local races on St. Croix, and then we would have you know, so-called national races. The Virgin Islands is a territory of the U.S., you know, so it's not a state. It has a different political designation. But we would have races in St. Thomas or St. John or Tortola all the time, and the groups would come together, and they'd get pretty big in numbers, you know, and that's actually where I met Finian for the first time. You know, we did a race. I think the first time he was maybe 10 years old, and I think I'm 6 years older than him, you know, so I was 16, and
was he bigger than you already?
He was already, you know, he was the same size as he is now, so at 10, so You would have never guessed he was 10 or 11 years old, but no, he was a big kid, you know, he was a big jolly kid. But anyway, the scene there was incredibly nice. And it played a huge role in my formative years, let's say, in terms of competition. And that's where I got my first taste of windsurfing competition, and everything grew out of there. So, you know, I have very, very good memories of that whole situation there.
Yeah, I think Finian once said he hasn't been under 100 since he was 13. So,
I mean, he really was a big kid, you know, and fast. Straight line speed was unbelievably fast as you know, as he is today. So not much change there from his side.
So how the hell does a kid from a small island in the Caribbean become a pro windsurfer in the era of no internet, no connections, no, you know, just decide to do it and go?
I mean, interesting. It's not something I decided I'm going to become a professional windsurfer. The whole thought process wasn't like that. I got into the sport. They started organizing some races. I participated in them. Got last the first race I ever did. Got last the second race I ever did. Third, fourth, fifth race. You know, I was just last, and then slowly started improving. You know, and getting better and you know, the better I became, the more fun I had, I guess. You know, I think that's the interesting thing about our competition. You know,
any sport, I guess.
Any sport, you know, the better you do, the more fun it is, you know, and the worse you do, the more miserable it is.
Yeah.
I think it got to a point where we had a very, very nice race in the Virgin Islands, start off in St. Thomas. It's called Hook In and Hold On. And this was the race that allowed me, this was my first international competition, if you could call it that. Because at that time it was incredibly popular, and we had maybe 250 to 300 sailors participating in that. And it was a point-to-point race over a period of a week. And we would start in St. Thomas and then sail over. We were all living on boats, sail over to St. John, then from St. John to Tortola, then different parts of Tortola, then Virgin Gorda. And then we would cruise around the whole Virgin Islands, which is unbelievably beautiful. And this became
just like my setting right now, correct?
Exactly, just like where you're sitting, yeah. And so this race was getting bigger and bigger every year, and the first year I decided to do it, I think it was the first year I did it. Might have been the second year, but I wrote a little letter as a, let me think, probably 14 or 15-year-old kid. I wrote a letter to F2. I think it was F2 America at the time. And I said, hi, my name is this, and I would like to, you know, I'm going to go participate in this race, and I would like to get sponsored, something like that, you know, not quite sure what kind of response. I had no idea how to go about getting sponsors. And to my surprise, they wrote back and they said, look, you win the junior division, we'll let you keep the equipment. We're going to send you some, you know, board and 3 sails, and you win your division, you keep it. If you don't win, you know, give it back, or we'll sell it to you at a discount. And but if you do win, keep it, and we'll see from there. You know, see if anything more is there. So I won my division, and actually I think I finished, I don't know, top 5 maybe overall, something like this. You know, and I got lucky because the president of F2 America was there. The president of F2 was there at the time, and they kind of saw, and they just kind of pulled me aside and they said, you know what, we'd actually like to sponsor you, and let's see what you can do, you know. And I think 2 or 3 weeks later, they sent me to California to do a qualifying series for the World Championships, which were in Lake Garda that year. And I went to the US and I qualified. You know, you had to be top 3 in the series, and I qualified for that. Then they flew me out to Italy, to Lake Garda, and that's where I saw this little blonde kid for the first time. And, you know, I saw him, I think I remember the first time I saw him, he's there in the corner sanding some fin or his board or something like that. And everybody was kind of whispering, kind of saying, you know, that's Bjorn, this kid from the Canaries Island. He's, you know, from the Canary Islands. He's really good, you know. And And I think I was actually bigger than him at the time. You know, we're about the same age. I'm several months older than him. But yeah, that was the first time I heard of Bjorn and this talent. You know, so that was basically my start. Is they started sponsoring me from that point on, and I was still in high school, and they actually started sending me a check also. You know, I was like, wow, this is incredible, getting a little bit of money for doing this windsurfing thing. And then it started, you know, it got me thinking if there's an actual career that can be made out of this, because I never really thought of it as a possibility at that point. You know,
well, you must have been pretty good. Obviously, they didn't, even in the golden years, they didn't just go out and pay anyone. So,
you know, I think the sport was booming at that time, you know, and I think companies were looking to grab talent quickly and you know, and I think there was money going around at that time. You know, I wasn't getting, you know, I think I was getting paid something like $500 a month or something like this. I can't remember the exact amount, you know. So it wasn't huge money or anything like that, but I think the companies were selling a lot of equipment at the time, and they wanted to you know, they had the budget to sponsor people, and the sport was growing, and you know, it was a good time to be in it.
Well, I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything, but what kind of years are we talking about? Late 80s? Is that?
Yeah. This was let's see, I graduated from high school in 86, you know, so it was around this period, 85, 86. And then actually when I graduated high school, I still wasn't convinced you could make a living out of this thing, you know, and I certainly had opportunities to go and compete and keep that. But my intention was graduating from high school and going to university, you know, and then these opportunities presented themselves for me to go and compete and travel. And in my head, it wasn't still clear that, you know, you could be a professional windsurfer, even though I'm reading all the magazines and I see Robbie Nash and Ken Winner and Anders and all these guys, you know, but it didn't, you know, I was like, okay, I'm this kid from the Virgin Islands, and, you know, can I do that also? It wasn't really so much in my thinking. And I actually enrolled in university at that time, and was going to go straight to university. And then I just kind of said, you know what, I want to give this windsurfing thing a try. And I told my parents, I'm going to take a year off and do this. And, you know, my mom freaked out a little bit. My dad was quite a mellow person in that respect. He goes, this is what you want to do, this makes you happy, then go for it. That year turned into 2 years, you know, and I struggled in competition. It wasn't like I went in there and I was top 10 or top 15 or top 20 for that matter. So it was a difficult thing, and I wasn't still sure about it, you know. And then I said, you know what, maybe I need to go to university and you know, get a degree. And this professional windsurfing is probably not in the cards. I was thinking, you know, I was quite conflicted, not from any pressure from my parents or anything, but conflicted about if there's a legitimate career to be had there. So in the end, I decided by myself, let's go to university, you know, and I was able to. So that's when I went to University of Colorado. It was a landlocked place, which probably, knowing what I ended up doing, wasn't the smartest decision, but I was thinking differently at the time. You know, I grew up surrounded by water, and I'd never been to the mountains and skiing and things like that. And I wanted to be an engineer. I actually got my degree in electrical engineering, but at the time I didn't, you know, I wasn't thinking windsurfing as a career anymore.
I mean, there's skiing in California. You could have gone to.
If I could do it again, I'd probably do it a little bit differently. You know, I probably would have gone to Maui and gone to the community college there first, and you know, seeing how I ended up, how things panned out. You know, but it wasn't. You know, now I see people like you, for example, and I've known you for quite a long time. You know, I think the first time I saw you was in Poland, probably in Łeba, something like that. You know,
like 2000.
And I think. Yeah. And so I think now you guys are, you know, a lot of windsurfers, professional windsurfers from quite an early age decided, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to commit myself to it and go for it. And my story wasn't like that. It kind of evolved into it. And it wasn't until I was in university, I think the going into the second year that I realized, you know what, I want to be a professional windsurfer. I understand, you know, you can make a living out of this and there's a career to be had. And this is what I want to do. And I actually got into this real big conflict in my head and somewhat of a depression, because I kept reading windsurfing magazines and seeing all these guys in there that I had competed against, beaten, and I see how well they're doing and everything. And I was just like, I need to do this. I can't be, you know, sitting in an office in 40, 50 years old going, I should have done it, you know?
Yeah.
And then I just said to myself, all right.
Really, really interesting that you're saying this, because not knowing that you went through this, I went through exactly the same. Because I'm probably not the best example of what you said, probably like Pierre or maybe Gabriel Brown, you know, really committing at an early age. I actually fully graduated high school normally, went to university, and in university, I realized like, shit, you know, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be stuck in class. And I seen all these guys, just like you say, I was competing with Pierre, with Gabriel, with Enes, with all these, this was kind of the crop, Alex Couzon, Sebastian Cordell, all these guys committed and I didn't. And when I went on tour, I was so far behind just after a year and a half of not doing it, or doing it much less than they, you know, at that stage. So it's absolutely amazing that you actually managed to A, graduate from university, and B, come back. Because me, after 5 years, I would be so far behind that there is like no chance, you know. So, this was difficult, but I did compete in the summers. So I was going to the school. Then in the summers, I would compete. I would do several events, you know. But it was completely half-assed. I even went to the Olympics in this period, you know. I was going to ask you about that later. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was quite funny because I took an Olympic board to Colorado and got there, you know, and I never had a car when I was in university, so I managed to get it to this lake, you know, and store it in some place over there. And I remember one day deciding to go train, you know, and take my bike out there, and it's cold. It's really cold, you know. It's Colorado and in Boulder, which is, you know, a mile high. And I'm looking at the lake from a distance on my bike, you know, and I'm like, oh, it looks like whitecaps. It doesn't look like any wind, you know. I'm like really confused about it, and finally I get to the lake and it's like there's still whitecaps there, and you know, then I feel the lake and it's just ice, and I'm like, oh, maybe I don't have a clear understanding of this whole situation, you know. I might need to come back in a couple of months once the ice melts, you know. But it was that
transfer straight away, like what? Like windsurfing, yeah.
But also, I grew up Caribbean, you know. I never, you know, I wasn't aware of those kind of things. So the whole thing was quite comical, you know. But yeah, it was difficult to when I committed to graduating, you know, and I even went through the whole interview process and in terms of trying to get jobs, just to get experience, just in case something doesn't work out in windsurfing. And my final year, I wrote to some companies again. You know, I said, "Hey, I'm coming back to racing." You know, and everybody's like, "Yeah, well, you know, It's been a while."
Yeah.
And a couple companies wrote back, you know, and said, "We'll lend you some equipment. You know, we'll pay it in 6 months, something like that." And I bought a car for a little truck for something like $1,000, $1,200, best $1,200 I've ever spent in my life. And drove out to the Gorge. I knew there was, you know, I basically graduated and said, okay, now let's go be a professional windsurfer, you know, and how do I start? And I just said, I looked at what I could do, you know, and at that time, the Gorge had the best racing series in the US. I said, okay, let's go.
Probably need to windsurf to become a professional windsurfer again.
Yeah. You know, so it was quite comical how my thinking was, but I said, okay, let's go to the Gorge and let's do some series there, improve yourself and get some sponsorship, and then you can get on the tour. Little did I know at that stage, it would take me something like 3 or 4 years to be able to even do my first event, you know, because to be able to get the sponsorship and the funding to do that. So I ended up going there, and I remember the very first race we did, I was maybe 30 something, you know, and I remember going.
And that's a Sunday series, yeah.
The Gorge series, yeah. And I remember going back to my little apartment. I rented a room in this house, you know, and that night, and just taking a really hard look in the mirror and just saying, okay, you just spent, you know, 4 years busting your ass off at the school, getting a degree in electrical engineering. You put that completely aside, committed to this racing thing. You show up at a race and get probably close to last, you know. And I almost like freaked out right there. But I just remember looking at the mirror and going, wow, is this a huge mistake you're making right now, you know? And then, you know, just went back to the beach. That they were having races every weekend. Went back to the beach that week and trained some more. And the next race got 17th, and the next race got 7th. The next race got 4th, you know. And then I was like, whoof, you know, every time I could look in the mirror a little bit more comfortably. And then things started clicking, you know, and it just kind of grew from there. But it was a very difficult time also because I didn't know if I could make it. I wasn't making any money. I was doing whatever, you know. I was teaching windsurfing, Rhonda Smith and Scott Sanchez. You know, Rhonda had a school in the Gorge, and I went to her and like, you know, can I do something at your school and teaching or whatever it is, you know. And I didn't know how to teach also, but you know, she's like, yeah, do this. And I hooked up with Ken Winter at the time also, who was incredibly instrumental to me at that time. You know, he kind of took me under his wings, and we would do projects together. He had you know, Ken Winter's a really, really smart, innovative guy, and he was doing a lot of things at that time. And
probably one of the best guys in the US at that time. And like, maybe just put it in perspective a little bit, because for my generation, we don't even know who that is. So probably from what I read, like a top 10 guy in the world and in the early days, and really, yeah, one of the stars, right? Early stars.
Not top 10, like top 2, top 3, you know. It was like, you know, I think several years it was Robbie in first, and, you know, in racing and slalom, whatever, him in second or third. You know, he was one of the very top guys there. And I remember first reading about him in magazines, you know. But when I met him, I actually met him for the first time in the Bahamas in 1986, I think it was. And we had this race, this long distance race. And there was a lot of big names there at the time, you know, and from not only from the US, but from Europe, you know, a lot of the top sailors were there in the world. And we did this race, we did this long distance race, and him and I, you know, sailed away from the whole pack. And it was a light wind race, so I was small at the time, or, you know, small. I was one of the lightest guys there. And we just had this huge upwind battle to the finish line. And I just got him at the finish line, you know, and I was like, holy shit, I won this race. And I remember coming back to the beach, and Ken comes running over and just high fives me. And he was so stoked about it, you know. And I was like, I wasn't expecting that reaction from somebody losing to this unknown kid. You know, but he was really supportive, whereas other pros at that time just came to me and was like, you just got lucky, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, what assholes, you know? But I remember that made a big impression on the guy.
Or looking at the gear, what's going on there that you actually managed, right? Because,
you know, just imagine, you know, somebody shows up at a PWA event right now and freaking wins a round, you know, and it's like nobody's heard of them and wins the whole freaking round.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's quite difficult, you know, and it was a little bit like that. Nobody knew who I was, you know, and suddenly I won a race, you know. It wasn't the event. Actually, I finished the event something like 5th or 6th overall, or 7th, 6th or 7th, I think it was, you know. And this is a $100,000 event at the time, you know. So pretty decent, respectable result, I think, you know. But really, nobody literally knew who I was. So, you know, it was really cool to get that impression from him. And then years later, when I went to the Gorge and we would train a lot together, and he just kind of took me under his wing, and I learned, you know, this is actually where I learned testing. You know, he got a job in Windsurfing magazine doing the equipment He was the equipment editor. And then we'd get all the equipment from the manufacturers and test them all out. And he's like, Jimmy, come to Aruba, come to North Carolina, come to these places, help me test out. And we would do that job. And that's how I learned. Those were my first formative testing experiences, and I'd learned
quite
tremendously.
Funny though, like a guy like this, imagine like some magazine today offers, I don't know, Pierre or Ross Williams a testing job, or Matteo or whoever. It's kind of like it doesn't really fit, right? Back then, I guess it was very, very different.
Yeah, I think now I think there's less importance on that now, but at the time there was so much equipment out there, and really getting these consumer reports is what it was about the equipment was quite important. I think the German surf magazine still does a lot of them, but I think it's become less and less relevant. And I think there's other forms of information out there now to understand what the equipment's all about and all that. But at those days, you picked up, you were interested in buying some windsurfing equipment. You read one of those magazines and you read the evaluations about it and all that.
We kind of sprinted into like mid 90s, I guess. But during university, you won the Olympic ticket or bid for the Virgin Islands, and you went to the Olympics.
This was, I don't know about you. You play a lot of sports also, Maciek. So I think when you're a kid, you play a lot of sports. The Olympics is one of the things you kind of look up to, and for me, it was a big dream to go to the Olympics since I remember playing any sports, and I was always looking at the Olympic athletes and all that. So it was a little bit surprising to go to the Olympics for windsurfing, but somehow in my head, I knew I was going to go to the Olympics since I was a little kid. I just had no idea it would be through windsurfing, and that experience itself was unbelievable.
For me, maybe not so much as you say, because you watch all these sports, but I grew up a windsurfer always, and my first board was a 78 liter wave board. For a kid was obviously huge or whatever, and in the Olympics, it was Mistral One design that looked already super outdated, late 90s or early 2000s. So I was looking at the magazines, seeing Josh Stone spoking and seeing, this young kid called Ricardo Campello doing all these crazy moves and, these guys. And then I looked at the Olympics and I was like, no, like that. So how already at your time, it seems like the gear at the Olympics was always a little bit outdated. Did it have that feel already? Like you're actually, you're doing a great thing. You're representing your country in the biggest event in the world, etc. But you have to do it on sort of shitty gear. Yeah,
it's and unfortunately, except for the '84 Olympics, we've never been on current equipment. The Olympic equipment that's been used was always not as good as the equipment that was available on that year, which is, if it's the fourth year of the Olympics, the fourth year of that cycle, then the design is 4 years old, and so it's always had that element of it. But when you're inside it, you don't even think about the equipment anymore. You're just thinking about, it's the Olympics.
So win it.
Yeah, you're in it, and I remember walking into the stadium at the opening ceremonies, and that's just unbelievable, that feeling. Even to this day, it gives me goosebumps. And the funny part about us, we walked to a certain stage, I think is in front of the Queen and King, in the stadium. So you go around the whole stadium, then you get to the King and Queen, and just as we get there, there's an eruption, in the stadium, just these massive cheers. And suddenly, we're Virgin Islands, so it's alphabetical. It's alphabetical, but the host country goes last, yeah? And just at that point, as we're approaching the King and Queen, the Spanish team enters the stadium. So the whole stadium erupted for them. But at least to me, I'm thinking, for a second there, we believed it was for the Virgin Islands, which was quite funny. And here's this tiny little team from the Caribbean, and the whole stadium erupts. But just the energy behind that, and just realizing, wow, this is the Olympics. And, it's quite an interesting, special feeling,
So it definitely lived up to the hype of you as a kid sitting in front of the TV watching.
Exactly. And just the whole experience, not only the competition on the water. I didn't do so good there. I finished, I don't know, 20 something, 26 or something like that. I'm incredibly bad with remembering results and things like that. But
especially the bad ones, right? I can remember the good ones, but
yeah, bad ones. But definitely a good experience. So something I'm very glad that I was able to do.
Okay, so you go through the whole graduating thing, the Gorge, Ken winner, and then you manage to get back on tour. How was the tour back then? How was the PBA, the Professional Board Sailing Association tour? Because it was the golden years, but how did it look from the inside?
Well, I think I missed the let's say the real golden years. I think I was in university or struggling to get into the events, trying to find my way there. I think those were the top peak years, let's say. So I just kind of missed that aspect of it. But there was a lot of events on tour. The money was better, the sponsorship was better at the time. And the industry was a lot better, so windsurfing was one of the original extreme sports, so to speak, so it was more companies wanted to get involved with it, and it was easier to have events, to organize events, to get companies into the sport. It was also at a time where cigarette companies and alcohol companies were free to invest in sports, and I think this is before a lot of regulation, especially in the EU or in Europe at the time.
Right? They did invest massively into windsurfing.
They Peter Stuyvesant was into travel company, and some alcohol brands were also in there, and they contributed a lot.
So you get back on tour, and that little kid you saw in Garda in 88 or 89 or whatever it is not really a kid anymore, is he?
I mean, he was an animal. He was unbeatable. I mean, it wasn't even close. If I could get close to him somehow on the course somewhere, whether it was slalom or course racing, he was just past you so quickly.
Or waves, or freestyle, or whatever.
I mean, he was doing everything, and I actually, the first time I went to Hawaii, going back, when I got sponsored by F2, they took me out to Hawaii, to go train with the F2 team, with the international team. And him and I actually shared a room in those times. And, how disciplined and how motivated he was unbelievable. Much more than anybody else I ever saw. And I would wake up in the morning, and I'd hear some sounds outside in the yard, and there'd he be by a tree, doing pull-ups and, working out, I'm just getting out of bed, and I'm looking at him going, oh, wow, this guy's working out, and he'd eat his breakfast, and he'd just be chomping at the bit to get to the beach. And he couldn't drive at the time, so he has to wait for everybody. He has to wait for the rest of the team to get going and eat the breakfast, but he was just chomping at the bit to go, and he was first one in the water and last one out, and day after day after day, and you saw from that.
How was he as a person? How was Bjorn as a person? Because he doesn't. I know him a little bit, and he's not the most outspoken. And in any videos, he seems more like he kept to himself, and he just went about his business, and that's it, and took care of the business really well, and that's all that mattered for him.
My take on him is, a lot of people maybe over the years haven't understood him so well, in terms of, I hear the word arrogant being thrown around and things like that. But my take on him is actually he's somewhat of a shy person also. So it's not somebody that's overly outward and, like a typical Latin person that's, that is, greet you with a big smile and a big hug and, things like that. And you quickly become good friends, you know, and I think he's a little bit more closed off that way. And I perceived it as arrogance at first, you know, but then I interpreted more as a little bit shyness also, not somebody that's
I think he just came in with a mindset like he's not there to make friends, he's there to win world titles, you know. And I think for many people, I mean, it's sort of a strength, because imagine going on tour and not talking to anybody, or not, you know, like just being so freaking focused. It's something that goes against human nature for most people. But the mindset that he had was obviously a lot stronger than that. He could just shove it aside, and But
I think now we you know, as the tour has gone on, and you see like the tour is quite interesting right now with how close a lot of the sailors are, you know, and it's actually a very interesting study on the PWA tour, because everybody's, you know, for the most part, it's surprising how good friends people are, you know. Of course, not everybody, you know, and we know there's very strong rivalries on the water that are also seen a little bit on land. But in general, you know, this is quite a close-knit family. I think with Bjorn at the time, it's what you said. The guy was in there, you know, he was all business. You know, he knew what he wanted to do, and that was his primary goal. And not that he's saying I'm not going to make friends, but he's just focusing on what he's trying to do, you know. And I think Bjorn's also developed incredibly good friendships throughout the years. You know, you see that, and
and you have to you have to back it up, because that's going to be seen as arrogant. And like you said, I study a lot of sports, and I came with a sort of similar mentality, but I was crap. So everybody just hated that, right? You know what I mean? You got to back it up if you're there just on business. He definitely did.
Yeah, and he backed it up better than probably anybody ever has in this sport, you know. So, you know, he accomplished what he needed to accomplish. And one thing I learned from him is a lot of people, I remember when we made the transition from going from custom boards to production boards, one of the biggest arguments there was, we're never going to be able to beat Bjorn because he has that equipment advantage over us, you know. And this was actually a very strong reason why we went to production equipment, you know, because everybody's saying his budgets are bigger. He can get, you know, he can show up at the beach with 30 boards, and we're not going to be able to beat him. You know, we can't compete like that. But I remember the first years we switched to production equipment, and nothing changed. He still kicked everybody's ass the same way, you know. So his real strength, you know, when it comes down to this, and now with what we're doing here in Turkey with training kids, also his real strength is his mind. You know, it's you develop your skills to a certain extent, you develop your knowledge, but the higher that level goes, then the smaller the differences are in speed and tactical ability and execution, all that. It comes down to your psyche, you know, and it comes down to your mind. And you can't beat the 64 best guys in the world on pure speed or pure jibing ability or pure. He actually did that for a long time, but he was, I tell you, he was the strongest mentally strongest sailor I've ever seen, I've ever met. You know, you understand, if you've raced with him, you've seen it, you understand you're up against that. So you can't have this internal self-doubt or questioning or anything like that. And I think he had very, very little of that.
Yeah, and the more he won, the more all the other guys had that, right? I mean, the famous interview, the team just needs to work a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And I mean, he let you know. I guess he let you know.
Yeah, but this was, you know, I won't talk about it, but I've had a couple of occasions with Bjorn where I saw him where he was battling with Antoine. I remember when Antoine started coming in and winning, but there was a couple of occasions when they were battling it out and it was coming down to the wire, and I understood his strength, his mental strength very clearly there, and I could see the contrast between the two sailors, and then you understood, wow, there's something else there. It's not just his speed, not just his size, not just his ability. It comes down to mental strength. And saying that, Antoine's incredibly mentally strong also. So, he's probably the second most successful sailor in the sport, in the sport's history, I think, with the number of world titles and all that. So
yeah, I think they're very different. They're just very different people, different sailors also in terms of style and ability, and it's just super hard to compare the two. And as you say, Antoine's, even though the age difference is not that big, Antoine's much more our generation. It's incredible how young he acts, actually. For 47 years old, he's still enjoying that as
Antoine's a big kid, isn't he?
Yeah, and it's insane. I remember in Azores, we would finish the racing, and he would be like organizing a jet ski to go tow windsurfing, and he would be so stoked and so motivated, it's insane, at 45 at the time, whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to those Bjorn years, who
just a point on that, Maciek, because I think this is very interesting what you just said about Antoine, and I think that's what's made Antoine and Bjorn so successful. I have this little story about when I went to North Sails I was in charge of the development of the sails, and we were testing sails in the Canaries, and Bjorn had switched from Neil Pride to North Sails at the time, and I had to test these free ride sails, so I went down to his school, and I called him up. I said, Bjorn, I have some free ride sails I need to test. Can you help me out with that? Normally with Bjorn, I was just testing, it was either the race sails or the wave sails at the time, but he wasn't involved in the free ride testing so much, so I go down to his place, in Playa Aguila, to his school, and rig up the sails, get everything ready, and say, okay, let's go out there. And we go out there and we test the sails, we switch sails, we go through the whole process. And I'm like, all right, that's it. Let's go back to the beach and finish it up. Free ride testing wasn't my favorite thing to do,
It's the worst.
Yeah, it's not so interesting if you're a racer, or, the wave sails is, the competitive equipment was really interesting to test, but the other stuff you're not so interested in. And I remember Bjorn just kind of looked at me and goes, why don't we go upwind a little further, and kind of looked down, went, okay, and when we started just sailing, we're done. We're just free sailing now. And I look over at him, and he's just got this big smile on his face, and we're just cruising around on free ride equipment, and he's freaking loving it, and I'm just like, what the hell? And all I want to do is go back to the beach, finish up my job, so to speak, but then I started thinking, this guy just loves being out on the water, and I think the same thing with Antoine. He loves being out on the water, and I think that's a huge reason they're as successful as they are. I've seen over the years some sailors do all the right things, but they do, I don't want to say the minimum, but what has to be done. They don't do more. Or you see that, you understand they're not out there going out for a cruise on a free ride sail, or going out, and after racing and doing all these other things. And I think the amount of time they've spent on the water, the amount of time they spent exercising, doing these things that they're actually enjoying, they love it, and I think the love of the sport is a huge, huge reason for their success. That's a huge element in that whole equation, which is quite a complex one, actually. But
yeah, it's the psychology in such a complicated sport as windsurfing. You see Bjorn, Antoine, or now Pierre and Matteo being such different people and being so successful. And if you really dig into it, I think in any sport you can see that. I mean, The Last Dance is now on Netflix, and you can see right. Michael Jordan and these guys, and Isaiah Thomas and Rodman, all being such completely different people from different places, being very, very successful on their own terms, in their own ways, you know. And like you say, you know, probably the love for the process is the only thing that kind of binds everybody together.
That's a common element, isn't it? You know,
yeah, it's very, very hard to win if you don't enjoy the process of getting there. And this is what I think a lot of people fail to understand, and and it's actually not that easy. It's actually not that easy, because many times you've been to Tenerife with us. You know how physically straining it can be, and how you don't want to get out of bed sometimes, you know, and just finding some little things to make your day, you know, and just it's very interesting. We could do another show on that, I think.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, as I said, you know. And I think now, like here at our center, we're training a lot of kids, you know, and you start thinking about what it is that's making somebody a good athlete, you know, and you understand the importance, the psychological aspect of it is hugely important. And you can teach people to go fast, you can teach people to drive, you can teach people how to start, the technical aspects of racing and all that, but the psychological part of it cannot be ignored, you know. That becomes, once you reach a certain level, that becomes 90% of it, you know. So. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm on that level yet, but I can feel that, and recent, I just start thinking about it much more, being aware of it much more, and the things you see when you start actually paying attention, it's pretty incredible. I mean, I think you could copy everything Bjorn did, and fail miserably, you know, or copy all the things Antoine did because maybe it doesn't suit you or whatever, you know. There's just so many elements. Yeah, I mean, it'll get you probably 85% of the way there, but it's that other, you know, you can even argue it's that other 2 or 3%, you know, that makes a difference. You know, I look at, you know, I'm a big fan of the sport also. So I'm observing a lot of sailors, how they're going around about with their training, which is quite interesting now with this Instagram and Facebook, and everybody's detailing their trainings and their lives a lot more.
Not real, Jimmy. Let me just break it down to you.
No, but you understand. I understand. You look at somebody like Matteo, for example, who's you know, been incredibly consistent the last several years, and he has that element of it also. I think you have that element of it also, where you're enjoying not only racing, you're enjoying wave sailing, you enjoy surfing, you know, you're enjoying different elements of it, and this is a huge aspect of it. And you know, I understand what you're saying about the Instagram thing, about being real or not real, but you know, you understand when people are also actually doing things, you know. And I see, you know, I'll use Matteo as an example because he has that success to go back on, and I get the sense that he has that very similar type of love for the sport and for what he's doing that Antoine and Bjorn have or had, you know. So I think that's an element of success. I see that in you also, you know, and I think you're getting very close probably to your goals. I think you're doing a lot of the correct things, you know, and you can see that you're stoked with the process, as you call it, you know. And
definitely such an interesting topic. I mean, and yeah, it's just endless examples we could bring. But so basically, you get back on tour. Bjorn's absolutely dominating. Who are the guys that are coming close to beating him? Does it ever come close, and why do they not beat him? Or for a 12-year stretch, why does he win absolutely everything? Freaking 12 years is a long time.
Yeah. You know, I think there was guys like Anders, who was famously second to him, and you know, I think that's a better question suited for Anders actually to answer, but
I'm not going to ask him. He's a big dude.
Yeah, no, Anders he's a great guy, but I don't have an answer for that, to be honest. You know, I think it comes back a little bit to what I was saying. He was just training so hard and was so on it, you know, that he just wasn't leaving any room for anybody to do more. You know, and I think he was doing probably close to 100% of what was possible to do at the time, you know, and Anders came close a bunch of times later on in like, I think course racing disciplines, things like that. I think Micah was actually quite close, you know. Kevin and Matt were right there. Kevin finally got it one year, you know, but that was a massive team effort, you know, 4 guys and a sail designer and board shapers, and, you know, just to go after one guy, you know. So I think it all goes back to ultimately, I think, to the strength of his psyche, which also pushed him to train and do all the, you know, leave no rock unturned. And we just haven't seen anybody that was able to dominate that much, you know. Even as successful as Antoine's been, it hasn't been that dominating as that stretch that Bjorn had.
Paint us a picture about the gear war and how much gear was involved, developed, maybe some numbers of boards that Bjorn was going through or the team was developing to beat him, sail designers being present at event site, modifying sails, the amount of fins. Just paint us a little picture.
I know, not being a top 10 sailor at the time, you know, I was spending, what was it, $25,000 a year on boards alone, you know, so it was all custom boards. I would go to every racing event with 2 board bags, 4 slalom boards minimum, 4 course racing boards, you know, so 8 boards I was going to every racing event with. And I'm not a top 10 sailor, you know, and that was, I think at the time Bjorn was, I don't know, you hear the stories of showing up at the beach with 25 boards, you know, and every board with a fin on it and things like that. I never witnessed that part of things, but you know, the boards were it was just a constant evolution of equipment, and everything was open. So you could use whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, however much you wanted. And it didn't stop evolving.
And sounds like it was quite an exclusive club. I heard a story from Andrea Kuki that never kind of made it in those custom days. He was trying to race production boards versus you guys on customs and couldn't get anywhere. And then he bought a custom of a Phil McGain, and not knowing that Phil had sanded all the rails down not to be sharp, basically sanded the board, I don't know, flat or into a different bottom shape, or just sanded it randomly into bumps and bruises and whatever, that basically no one from the outside of the club could actually copy the design. I'm
not sure Phil would actually do something like that, you know, but I think it's a little bit now. I think it's a little bit wasn't so sinister, I think, as you're making it out to be. But I think it's a little bit like what happens with carpenter fins, for example. Now, you know, it's like you try to get a fin now, it's quite difficult. You know, not because he doesn't want to sell it to you or anything like that, just because there's so many orders and there's so many backlogs. And I think at the time, for example, with Alex, not everybody could buy Alex's board because there was a limit as to how many he could actually make by hand, you know, and already the guys that he had on the program, that was filling his time, you know, so he didn't have time to make, you know, perhaps for somebody like Andrea, you know, maybe the same thing with Phil. But I can also see that maybe there was some protectionist action being taken, you know, if you're selling some stuff that really you didn't want somebody else to see, you know. I don't know if he would do something so randomly to make something bad that he would sell, you know. But I think at that period of time, there was a lot of secrecy involved in the development of equipment. You know, it was incredibly rare to be able to, for example, Mike and I were working with North Sails together at the time. It was incredibly difficult or rare that we could line up with Phil, who was, you know, with Maui Sails. I think it was Maui Sails at the time, you know, to be able to line up even for 10 seconds to measure what we're working on, you know, how the sails are working or how anybody's speed is. Everybody was staying very far apart, you know, and just working together in teams. You know, you wouldn't let somebody come and line up next to you, you know what I mean?
And that's really funny, again, comparing these generations, because right now, like if we train together, if we do race simulation, nobody would be on their best gear, not because they don't want to show their speed, but just because they want to save their best mass and their best fins. Obviously it's composites, so it might break, etc. But then Antoine, that obviously never trained with us, he really struggled to believe that we would do that, because first of all, he would struggle to believe that we trained together so much. And then once it became obvious, he struggled to believe that we would do that, because if you show, you want to freaking show strength, you know, you don't want to. It seems like it changed a lot from back then.
Well, I think back then also you're developing all this equipment continuously, you know, so you don't want to show your cards. You don't want to show how much improvement or how much evolution you've done, you know. You don't want to make the other guy, the other company work harder. You know, if you made big advances, you don't want to let somebody else know you've made those big advances until it's, you know, until you go to the races. So everybody was a little bit like that kind of, and I remember my heart rate would actually increase the first time I would line up with somebody else. And that was like, you've been working on developing these sails for, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And, you know, here you are, here comes the moment of truth. You come together and line up, and, you know, what happens if this guy just completely burns you? You know, you're just like, it didn't work. We messed up, you know?
Kind of Formula One test, preseason testing type moment.
Yeah. So it was quite radical, that whole period. And yeah, nobody ever came together, you know, and people were training, you know, even in Hawaii where there's, you know, you go to Kanaha, you can either go a little bit upwind or a little bit downwind or go down to the harbor or whatever it was, you know, everybody was spreading out pretty much. And
yeah, the whole beach in Kanaha is maybe like 500 meters to maybe a kilometer. And you would have to fit how many teams, like big teams?
Yeah, you know, there could be 3 or 4 different, you know, it could be Neil Pride, Maui Sails, North Sails, you know, they're all there trying to develop their stuff, and everybody's, you know, you see the sail designers are all there with their binoculars looking at everybody else's stuff. And, you know, nobody's really coming to you up close on the beach and looking at your sail. Everybody was pretty respectful also in that respect. But yeah, I remember a couple times trying to sail with Phil or Kevin, you know, I would just go down and line up right next to them, and immediately people would sheet out, you know. It's like, yep, this is not going to happen. You just kind of sit there for a couple seconds realizing, you know, nobody would say anything like get out of here or anything like that, but yeah, they would just sheet out, and then you get a hint and say, okay, it's not going to happen, so let's go, you know. Whereas now it's a lot more open. But I think what's happened in Tenerife is very interesting, and great movie that you did the other day, that you released the other day on that whole evolution of the thing. But essentially this was a little bit what the team did at the time, you know, with Phil McGain and Scott Fenton and the Pritchard brothers. You know, they got together and they said, let's, you know, we can improve a lot better if we work together. And that's essentially what's happening in Tenerife. And especially at the beginning, you know, I think when Andrea tried to bring the whole 0.7 team together there and improve the whole 0.7 team, you know, I think that was that's the correct model to use. And now the interesting part is that it's just a bunch of, it's not anybody from a team, you know. It's
very
a collaboration. it's collaboration between sailors, and it's proven an incredibly effective model to get results. You guys are doing it. You guys are getting the results, and there's no questioning the method there.
Yeah, I think back then was also a lot different because there was so much more gear. The speed differences. If I watch a race from back then and I see Bjorn starting 5 seconds late and arriving to the first mark first, that doesn't happen today, no matter who you are. Like, I put my number 3 fin and Antoine is on his best gear. He starts 5 seconds late. There's no chance he gets, and I'm not even his competitor. I'm fighting to, maybe get 1 podium in my whole career so far, and he's winning world titles. We're not even in the same league, and that doesn't happen. And I think that's a lot of people fail to understand that. They think it's like back in the days where the speed differences were a lot bigger, and probably the significance of the racing elements was a lot smaller. So the thing we do in Tenerife has a lot more importance in today's era.
Yeah. My question to you is: you have a number 3 fin? How many fins do you have?
A lot, too many. Way too
No,
many.
I think that's a little bit what was happening with the equipment wars, and it's like, even when we switched to production equipment, I was getting, my board allotment was quite big. I think maybe at one point it was something like 20 boards a year, and then I'd pick out, 3 or 4 of the same model, and then I would just pick out the fastest one, and that one you test all 4 boards, 3 or 4 boards of the same model, and you put the best one away and only for the races. And
let's not confuse anybody. The gear war is still on.
Yeah,
it's just
it is, and it's a little bit different, but I think that's what was happening there, and I think at the time it was more difficult to get the equipment. Now you
get into the war, to get into the battle even. Yeah.
Well, now you can order if you have the budget, you can order 4 or 5 boards. If you want to get 485s, then you can do it. Whereas back then, if you wanted to order 4 or 5 boards, you couldn't necessarily physically get them. They weren't available to you.
Yeah, but you still today, if you wanna order a 490 with a 76 top, you probably need to have an in at the factory or be properly sponsored. But yeah,
I think and this is the advantage that top sailors have right now is I think it's difficult to get these custom masks. I think it's unless you're in the development team, and it's quite difficult to get them. But it is an advantage to be able to sift through 4, 5, 6, 10 490s and pick out the magic one. This is possible for the top riders that have a bigger budget or bigger equipment allotment than it is for the lower rank sailors. So there's still that equipment battle and the equipment differences there, but it's available.
You never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so there was, you mentioned the money. There was a lot of money involved. How did that rub off on the sailors? Because the picture our generation gets is sort of a rock and roll lifestyle on tour. Is that, of course, maybe more so in the waves or the early freestyle days than the racing, but still, how was that from your memory?
Look, some guys were making good money, and by good money I mean they were probably had contracts that were worth over $100,000 a year from, maybe they had 2 or 3 sponsors like that. I don't know exactly how much people like Robbie or Bjorn made and things like that, but I know what was offered to me from time to time, and the money was much better, but I don't think it's accurate also to say that there was a huge amount of money going around, because it's never been a sport comparable to football or anything like that. And I don't think we can talk in the millions. I
think the value of money has changed, and let's maybe compare to, like, you could probably buy buy a house with 1 year's contract, whereas now it probably takes a lot longer than that.
Again, I think there was a few guys that were able to make some pretty good money, you know, the very, very top guys that were able to get money from the sales sponsor, from a board sponsor, you know, some
And outside the industry, the sport was a lot bigger as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, so there was probably guys that were able to make, you know, $200,000-$300,000 a year, but I don't think it was also so many guys being able to do that. You know, so I think it's a little bit exaggerated what people believe how much money was going around at the time. You know?
But I don't think I was asking about the numbers specifically, but maybe more about the lifestyle, the rock and roll. I know your wife is probably sitting somewhere, so you're not going to mention all the groupies or anything, but there was an element of that, having a lot of media, having TV, at events, and it was an era where not everybody could be a celebrity on Instagram. It was an era where you actually, to get famous, you needed, just different. It was just different ways, right? And
yeah, I think,
and guys were. I mean, until this day, Robbie comes to Silt. I walk down the street in Silt, and there's this like crowd of people. I thought somebody died or something in the middle, and there's Robbie signing autographs and saying, and just speaking German to the guys, right in the middle of the street. So,
yeah, I think in Europe the sport grew so much in Europe, and I think at one point they did a poll in Germany, and they asked who, a poll about who the most popular athletes or recognized people in Germany, something like that. And I think Robbie was number 3 or something like this, after Boris Becker and somebody else. Or maybe a football player or Formula One driver. What's his name? Michael Schumacher. Yeah. I think actually he was behind Schumacher and Boris Becker at the time, which were global celebrities. So that's how big the sport was at the time in Germany and throughout Europe. I think in Holland also. So I think Bjorn and Robbie and Robert Teritau and Anders Bringdahl, and I think especially Robert and Anders, they had that rock star personalities also. And I think that brought up a lot of those images that you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. We remember the most, the most extreme cases, right? Yeah. I remember, I don't know, Robert jumping off the big ship and just being a total rock star in Bercy, jumping out of the pool and, waving at the crowd and pulling chicks out of the crowd and whatever, right? I mean, this is, I think, this is what you remember. You probably wouldn't remember the, Bjorn in bench pressing for 20 minutes in the video or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe where it comes from. But so anyway, back to you. You actually did a lot of your best results in your kind of late 30s, sorry.
Back when I was 50.
Late 30s, even early 40s. And I remember my first kind of proper sponsor on tour that gave me an insight was Patrick, which was colorful, as you can probably imagine. And he always told me every time we would test something and I would be like, Patrick, but this is so much faster. He would go like, yeah, speed is speed, but in the end, Jimmy is 3rd in the world. So tell us how did you manage at 175? You're about that, right? Like 175 cm, not the most.
No, I'm not 175. I'm like, what am I? I'm 5'10", 178, something like this. 178.
Anyway, not something that you would think like, oh, this guy is probably huge and fast and whatever. You managed to score multiple podiums, come 3rd in the world for multiple years. So what was your thing? How did you manage to actually get those results?
Well, I didn't have so many podiums also. but I think my biggest thing, I think my biggest flaw or my biggest deficit was my boat speed. You know, I was never so fast. So it wasn't like I could come off the line, hit the buoy first, and getting to the buoy first was always my big problem. You know, I couldn't get there first.
It makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? Once you do it.
If I'm ahead, I know how to keep people from passing me. So I think my biggest strength was I was always thinking on the race course, you know, and a lot of people, especially that have course racing experience, kind of look at slalom and say, okay, and all that, but there's so many freaking tactics involved in it. And I think my biggest strength was that I was able to in a way kind of slow down the race and see what was happening and how things were going to develop in front of me. And I think my biggest strength was the first and second jibe, you know, and I was able to tactically approach those, even though not in first place. I was able to get out of there in qualifying position, you know, so you just have to be top 4. And I was able to, you know, often get there. You know, I remember one race in New Caledonia, coming back to the beach, you know, I think not last year, but the year before, first time I went to New Caledonia that we went over there. I came to the beach and Micah came up to me. He's like, how the hell did you qualify? You know, he's like, I saw you way in the back, last something. He's like, how the hell did you qualify? How I don't understand, you know? And I think my strength was not being able to get off the line so quick. This was my big weakness, but my strength was that first jibe and being able to accelerate quickly. So I didn't have a very high top speed, but my acceleration to probably about 85-90% was pretty good. And I knew how to close gaps. And in my mind, what I always said is just get me within 1 or 2 seconds of that first mark, or get me within 1 or 2 seconds of that guy in front of me, and I'll probably be able to pass him, even though his boat speed, his top end speed is faster than me. So I think I was able to accelerate quicker, and I was able to jibe technically a lot of times better than the people around me, but also tactically better. So I would seldomly take myself out of the race. I would always be in the race, even into that last jibe. And I don't know how many times I came into that last jibe in 5th position and was able to get out of there, you know, in 4th.
Well, like qualify to the next round. Like a close fifth.
Very.
Breathing down the neck of the guy, putting pressure on him, and psychologically using, it's almost an advantage. I mean, I wouldn't say it's an advantage, but it's, if you put pressure, anyone, I don't care who it is, I've seen the best of the best make mistakes while under pressure. And if you don't put pressure, I mean, we all can jibe. Everybody on tour can jibe alone, you know, but once it gets down to that last mark, semifinal, make the final or not, you know, and probably the guy with 20 years more experience, you probably put your money on him, which would be you, because you managed to get also great longevity without injuries and being kind of, where do you think your peak was? What age? Probably the podiums I got in Korea and Vietnam, you know, I think 2010, that was 11, 10? Probably, yes, 2011, 2012, something like that. I can't even remember. I'm really bad at that, but yeah. So you were in your. I mean, this is a little bit the beauty of the sport is it's, you can practice it for quite long, and now I understand. You know, your mind. I'm 52 now, and your mind is still there. Your mind is still telling you can do it, and then your body kind of tells you, no, you can't anymore. You know, but this is how nice it is, I think, for windsurfing, and that I think realistically you can compete into your 40s in windsurfing, in slalom, you know, not in freestyle,
But and it's rare for any sport to be able to compete that long. You know, if you're playing in the NBA, by the time you're 35, you're really looking at retirement quite soon. You know, so but windsurfing, shit, it's almost like golf. You can keep doing it for quite a long time. Look at Antoine. He's what, 46, 47, 48 now?
Yeah.
And he's still top 3 in the world. Jesus, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think as long as you can manage your body well and still have that passion that we talked about earlier, I think these are the 2 things that probably fade the earliest. Looking back at your racing career, do you think that you could have done a lot better if you know now what you know back then?
100%.
You know back then what you know now.
Yeah, 100%. And you talk about injuries and all and things like that, but I actually had numerous injuries throughout my career that were quite chronic. You know, the biggest one is my back. Yeah. It's not even, nagging is, to put it mildly, but I remember early on when I first went to Hawaii, or the second time I went to Hawaii, really after university, I said, okay, I'm in 100%, and I would go sailing all day, and then I'd go to the gym. There's a Gold's gym in Wailuku, and we'd go in there and just stupidly pump weight, and I tore both my rotator cuffs bench pressing, and just doing a lot of stupid things. And for several months I couldn't lift my arms above my shoulder, above my head, because of the torn rotator cuffs and everything that happened. Then I had really bad back injuries where I could almost not walk, and I would go almost crawling to the chiropractor because my back was locked up. And this is something I suffered to this day. And I had a torn meniscus, also competed with that in Fuerte one year. And it was hell. So I've had some injuries, and I think looking back, one of the things I would do is early on get a proper personal trainer to teach me how to train and how to do it properly. And it wasn't until I was able to join the MPG program and train with Scott Sanchez that I started learning properly about how to train. So this was a big thing.
Which doesn't mean you weren't sore or getting slightly injured. I mean, do you know any professional slalom sailor that doesn't have a sore back from time to time? I know not being able to get out of bed is a different story, but these are the type of injuries, everything you listed, bad shoulders, bad back, is kind of what, my generation, that we have the best care, personal trainers, etc. We still.
I think, for example, I when I went to Hawaii and I'm working out at the Gold's gym there, and I'm just stupidly in my mind believing I need to push as much weight as I can. And physically what happens is your muscle fibers develop quicker than what your tendons or your joints at a slower rate than what your tendons or your joints can withstand. So physically you can push that weight, but your system can't handle it. And I ended up tearing my rotator cuffs because of that. If you have a personal trainer, if you know this stuff beforehand, you won't try it. You build up a base over time, and then start building up the muscles accordingly. So things like this, it wasn't day-to-day sailing. It was doing stupid things. One of the things I learned to do quite late was actually take a day off from sailing, to have a rest day where you don't do anything and let your body regenerate. So when I was in charge of the development programs, for example, with Neil Pride and North Sails, I was sailing 7 days a week the whole time. I wasn't stopping, and I was spending so much time on the water rigging. My body wasn't resting. I'd wake up, I'd go to the gym, go to the beach, train, develop sails, rig sails, continuously be on the water, get out of the water, go for a bike ride, come home, probably eat deficiently. It was just not the proper way to do it. And if I were to go back, I would take a very, very close look at that from the beginning either learn about it or hire a personal trainer, probably a nutritionist. If I had the money, I would have hired a sports psychologist also, So I look at my career, and there's a ton of things I could have done much, much better, and for sure I would have gotten much better results as it stands, and I think that's the thing. I see you guys now. And doing all the training. I'm very impressed with the training you're doing, even though sometimes I question whether it's more applicable to a basketball sailor or a windsurfer.
It gets clicks on Instagram. As I told you, don't believe everything you see on Instagram. I do a lot more basic squat. I'm not going to put my squats and deadlifts on or my yoga, which is very, very bad.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the beauties now is every generation is hopefully getting better, and you're building on what the previous generation learned and all that. And I think this generation, your generation, for example, is training a lot in a much more educated way. A lot of you guys are doing that. You see so many of you guys have a personal trainer, and doing things correctly, and this is making the big difference. I think this is what Bjorn was doing also. He was training incredibly out of the water. And I think he was one of the first guys one of the first windsurfers to recognize the importance of that. And he kept that totally to himself. Not very many people understood what he was doing, But now you see more and more, and I think this generation knows a hell of a lot more about nutrition and training than what we knew,
You've been involved in R&D a lot, in development, research and development a lot over your years, and you already answered that it kind of hindered you, and this is what I think the biggest misconception is. I think people think that Antoine develops the New Pride sails and Matteo develops the Severns, and Pierre's develops the North sails, the duotones. Of course, they are involved, but they are not main people behind it, just because of that time factor that you mentioned, that they want to train and they want to be. And many, many times also, these guys are fast on everything. So probably a guy like myself or you that probably don't have the super, extra 6 gear speed, have actually much bigger differences when testing, right? On good gear, you can go as fast as Antoine, but on the bad one, you know what I mean? Like
I've always believed that let's say the sailors like Bjorn and Antoine, Micah's, their margin of error is much smaller in terms of if they don't put, if they're missing half cm of downhaul, they may not necessarily get affected to it too much, whereas if I miss half cm of downhaul, my speed is finished. You know what I mean? So they can get away with a little bit. Yeah. So there's that element of it. But I think what I saw working with Neil Pride and North Sails, the smartest way to develop equipment, you got to put somebody in charge of that, and you got to strategically allocate your team guys to do what they do best, So if you have somebody like Bjorn, you don't want him developing the free ride sails, wasting his time developing the free ride sails when he can be training for his racing or for his competition. But what you want to do is use him when you're developing the racing sails to give you the input on how the equipment is going. So my position with both Neil Pride and North later on was I was the one that was in charge of developing the sails and working with the different people, which was an incredibly interesting experience because I managed to work with, I think, a lot of the top guys throughout my career, in developing the equipment. And it was like working with Bjorn on development of the race sails, with Micah, Anders Springdahl even Patrice Belbel early on when I first went on to Neil Pride, in the wave sails with Jason Polikow, and freestyle sails with Josh Stone. You know, so a lot of with Antoine also in developing the sails. So a lot of the top guys I managed to work with, but that's the way you got to do it. If you're developing the whole line, get your top sailors to help you develop what they're the best at. So I'm not going to grab Jason again and, you know, have him do some race runs with me or on the freestyle sails even, you know. We're going to go to Hukipa and we're going to look at the sails there and try them out together with him. So this is the way you develop the sails. And I think what you were talking about with Pierre and Matteo, you know, they got with duotone, Marco's in charge of that, you know, and I think he's doing a lot of let's say the legwork.
That is, yeah.
You know, and then you bring in Pierre to test specifically that sail and to give the input on the whole thing. And I think that's the way it probably works with Matteo also. You know, I think Gonzalo probably is doing a lot of the legwork there with those sails, I think, you know, and I think that's the proper way to structure the program. But you got to put somebody in charge of the whole thing, and that somebody can't necessarily be the sail designer. That's the next step.
Yeah.
Going forward.
How much influence or how much of the final product is the designer, and how much is the rider? If you have to give a percentage, because I have a take on this, and I wonder if your one is similar to.
Well,
mine.
if you ask the sailor, it's the sailor probably about 90%, designer 10%. And if you ask the designer, it's the other way around. You know, I think. Look, I think it's the designer probably. Let's just take the race sails. You know, I think the designer's probably getting the sail 85 to 95% there. You know. You start with the basic structure, the basic plan of the sail, and then you start tweaking it. And it's quite easy to take quite a good sail and make it a sail that's not going to be competitive. You know, this can happen so incredibly easily. So that extra 10, 15% is the key to getting a successful race sail out on the market, you know? So both are incredibly important, you know, but I think the sail designer is by far most of it, but the sail cannot be successful without that extra 10, 15% that the sailors are going to bring into that.
Well, I would probably put a higher number than 10%, but I have a similar idea that the sail designer has his concept and the way the sail feels in general, whether it's, you know, a lot of love curves. Certain designers, they have certain ideas and they kind of stick to them, right? You cannot come in and just change the whole concept, like, look, Robert, or look, Kai, now I come and we're going to do this. But that sail that comes out, that first prototype, probably it's enough to get you into the race, but then the actual, you know, to win the race, you need those riders, right, to push in the correct direction.
You don't have good riders, you're not going to come out with a good sail. I'm 100% convinced of that. There's no way. It doesn't matter who you are as a sail designer. You know, you need that final confirmation of things. You need the final 5, 10, 15%, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, because the concept could be great, but if it doesn't release enough, for example, it's not going to go fast.
Exactly.
And
but this is
the sail designer is not just taking your experiences, which is Robert Stroy and Kai Hopf. Robert, very good sailor, but he's not racing size, and then Kai is kind of the opposite. He's well in the 100 kilo range probably. so he would have kind of the opposite feeling if he goes on the water, right? But so talking about that, because you're on Neil Pride, and year 2000 or 2001, this guy called Robert Stroy comes in. And what was your impression of him? Because he is not necessarily a guy, like you wouldn't meet him on the street and think like, oh, he's a windsurfer. He's more of an designer / crazy scientist / he's kind of that kind of guy. What was your first impression of him working with Niels Rosenblatt before and having Robert?
That's actually quite a good question. When I first went to Neil Pride, then it was with Nils. Nils was working there, and I like Nils a lot. The guy's incredibly smart. Actually, all the sail designers are incredibly smart. These guys are all really, really sharp. But I enjoyed working a lot with Nils. He's very witty and he has that sarcastic sense of humor that I tend to have also. And so I was really excited to work with him on things. And I was actually quite disappointed when things changed there at Neil Pride, to be honest with you. And then, as you said, this guy, Robert Stroy, came in, and I'd never heard of him before, so I was a little bit surprised. And
he came from ART, didn't he? More working with Monty Spindler in ART.
Yeah, exactly. So he was working with Monty, who's another great sail designer, but I'd never heard of him. I didn't know what was happening so much with ART at the time, so I didn't know he had been working with them and all that. And suddenly he came in, and personally, I was a little bit sorry to lose Nils there because I knew how talented he was, and personally, I liked him quite a bit. But soon after Robert came in, then I could, I think it took me a little while to begin to understand him, and I was a little bit skeptical probably because I didn't know who he was, and suddenly it's like you've been working with somebody like Larry Herbig at North Sails and Kai, and you knew, Barry, you see Barry working around all the time. And then
you're established. You're already established, and he's kind of a new guy, let's say.
I wouldn't look at it that way, but I just didn't know who he was, and I knew all the other good sail designers around. So I didn't know. Suddenly, this guy came into Neil Pride, the biggest company at the time, and suddenly he's in charge of the sail development. So I was a little bit apprehensive, but it didn't take long to understand that he's also incredibly smart and talented, and he's got a lot of sharp ideas going on. And I remember we struggled with the first sail, getting the first sail, trying to, we didn't use any of the Nils designs and just started off with his designs. And that was a little bit of a struggle to get those to work the way we wanted them to, and I think, at the time we went to the World Championships I think it was in Thailand, in Pattaya, for the Formula Worlds was the first ones we used with the RS designs, and they weren't so good. These were also the big 10, 11, 12 meter sails and all that.
They still won though, right? Didn't they? I mean,
no, I think Wojtek won on a different model, was it? Or it was a completely modified model? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it was not production sales at that time in Formula Windsurfing.
No.
Actually, until this day, it's still not production sales.
So there was a little period of adaptation there from my side anyway, and I think Robert just came in and just took charge quite quickly. And in terms of, I think for him, he seemed quite clear in terms of what he wanted to do and all that. And I was just trying to go with it, to try to support him and the designs and try to make him as best as we could, and I think that was the way to move forward. It wasn't something that we were fighting or there was a conflict or anything like that, and we just try to move forward from where we stood. It's like he came in as a sail designer, and actually at that point I was only helping Nils with the race sails, and it wasn't until Robert came in we worked on the race sails, and then I think shortly after he said, can you do the whole line? Can you be in charge of the whole line?
So now that we have the introductions done,
Jesus.
No, I'm just kidding. So in 2005, you get elected president, and elected president of the PWA, or the chairman of the PWA. Is that the correct title? And you've told me personally a funny story how that, or not a funny, quite an interesting story how that came about with a certain event. And why don't you give us a rundown how you went from basically being one of the sailors to all of a sudden sort of running the show?
You know, if you're correct in the 2005 time, me becoming president, because I can't remember those dates so well. Around that period, for some reason or another, I was getting approached by a lot of the organizers, just at events. You know, they would, for some reason, come up to me because I wasn't on the management board or anything like that, and they would just say, "Look, we're having some issues. You know, things are not running so smooth with the management, and you know." And they would just start.
You speaking perfect Spanish had a lot to do with that, right? We're talking.
Well, it wasn't only the organizers in the Canaries. It was other organizers also. You know, like I remember going to Hungary one year, and the organizer coming to me there and talking, and so suddenly I started opening my eyes a little bit more towards how the things were being run and the relationships that we were having as an association with the organizers. And it came to a head in 1 year in Gran Canaria, where we had a problem, a conflict with trying to get a tour sponsor for the PWA, and how that tour sponsor was a competitor of one of the event sponsors. And that whole situation was extremely mismanaged, let's say, and everybody from both sides was I think handled the situation not so well, because it exploded, you know, and it really looked like at that point that we were going to lose another event. And
that was that Nesty coming in as a tour
exactly
sponsor.
Yeah, so in that year, Nesty was going to come in and possibly become a tour sponsor, and this was going to be a test event for them, and they were going to reevaluate after this event and perhaps dive into the whole tour. You know, so it was quite important for us, but unfortunately, it was in, you know, a direct competitor of one of the sponsors for the event in the Canaries. So the organizers obviously weren't happy, and yeah, and they blew up, we blew up, you know, and I was sitting at a restaurant there, El Viento, I think, and, you know, drinking a coffee or something. Somebody comes running in and says, Jimmy, you gotta come help us. These guys are gonna start, you know, hitting each other or something like this, you know. And I'm like, what? And you know, we went over there, and the situation was extremely, and because I know Spanish, then I could go in there and you know, ease the tensions, I guess. I don't know. But it was after all that I understood that things were not looking so good for us as an association, and that a lot of the relationships were strained, and we needed to do something about it, you know. And I think also we were able to recognize that Phil had put in quite a lot of years into the PWA, and I think he made a lot of sacrifices for the PWA also, and did a really good job, you know. But I think he was probably starting to burn out on it, you know, and
I think we should actually fill in what actually happened and how did the association come of that structure, because in the golden years it was run by a media agency called SSM, right? And then that went south for financial, or I don't want to, let's say, pinpoint anything because I wasn't there, but there was some let's say, not very legal activity or whatever, and that went down, and the sailors actually took over the control of what was then being renamed the PWA, right?
Right. So I think perhaps
Bill again, being kind of the experienced guy and, you know, really well anchored in the industry, he became chairman.
Yeah, I think maybe we should take it back a little bit more, even to the days that it was called WSMA, which is the World Sailboarding Manufacturers Association, no? And that was the original start of a professional tour. And that's basically, you know, a sport getting evolving, getting more and more popular. All this equipment's coming on board. Everybody's selling a lot of money, and the manufacturers coming together and saying, let's do the logical thing here and promote this thing better. We need a professional tour, you know, and they come together and pool their resources and develop a tour. That then grew into, you know, what later on became the PBA, managed, you know, then it wasn't the industry, then it became something managed by a marketing company, as you say. And all the problems that came along with it, suddenly we went from a tour that was managed by the industry, opening up things for people to believe that the industry's taking advantage of the sailors, so kind of a union type of thing, then it being handled by a marketing agency, and then allegations of corruption and this kind of things, mismanagement, and again, the sailors being taken advantage of, to an association that was like, all right, let's do a collaboration between the sailors and the industry, you know, but let's make sure the sailors have a bigger say in this whole thing so that the sailors don't get exploited or don't feel exploited. And that's how we came to modern day PWA. So we have now an association run by a management board, 4 sailor representatives and 3 industry representatives, you know, and it's called the Professional Windsurfers Association, but I think it's important to stress here also that this is a big collaboration between professional sailors and the windsurfing industry, you know, so it's not solely professional sailors here.
So you're the president or the chairman. What I think a lot of people wonder, what does actually the president of the PWA do? What kind of function that is in theory and what it is in reality?
Well, it's the chairman of the management board, yeah, and the president of the association. So in theory, as a chairman of the management board, you're overseeing the management board. You're the head of the management board, managing the communication between the management board and how we're running the association, let's say. What my job is in the PWA is basically overseeing the operation of the association. You know, we are structured in a way that we have this 7-person management board, but the PWA is largely, a lot of the footwork, or let's say most of the footwork, is done by our tour manager, Rich Page, as you know. So he's been with the PWA now, I think, for 27 years. So Rich is doing the job of 3 or 4 people probably in the PWA. And this is something also that people perhaps don't see so much with the PWA, that we are probably a smaller entity than what most people believe us to be, you know. So we have this management board that's changing a lot from year to year. We get 4 sailor representatives getting voted in or out every year. The same with the possibility for the president, actually. So we have these elections every year. The industry is every 2 or 3 years they have elections on who they elect to represent the industry side of things. But my job is overseeing running the association, and what does that mean? That means, first of all, working very closely with Rich. Rich is in charge of many aspects of the association, including negotiating a lot of contracts with organizers, coordinating the media aspect of it, coordinating the judges, the rules, all aspects of the association there. And my job is overseeing and strategizing coming up with a strategy on how we're gonna run and adapt and move forward with the association. Is that vague enough of an answer?
That's super vague.
Yeah.
I mean, so basically you get up in the morning, you open your laptop and you just solve problems. Is that a correct? Or do you support Rich in solving day-to-day problems, and then you represent the PWA where it needs to be represented?
I'm also the representative of the PWA when we go to events. We have to give speeches, the face of the PWA, this kind of thing when at events and things like that. That's a little bit the least of it. For example, yesterday, what did I do yesterday? I had conversations over the phone with the representative of the president of IWA. We're discussing more collaborations between the PWA and IWA and IFCA and Formula Windsurfing. I wrote a couple of letters to some of the sailors that need some certification from the PWA to allow them to sail now during the pandemic. We're dealing with a situation with world sailing, so there was discussions with Rich about that, about our situation, what's going on. I had to write some emails also to one of our organizers in the Canaries event because they're dealing with some things for government subsidies for the sailors and getting officially recognized and certified through their federation, through their national federation, and through World Sailing. Preparing some documentations also for some of the sailors that are applying for some visas. Also spoke to Matthias in Zilt about the event in Zilt this year. So it's things like that. We're talking about what to do right now with the pandemic, with what's happening, what direction we're going to take, where we need to be, looking at our budgets, seeing how much trying to understand how much we can handle in terms of sustaining what we have without having events, sustaining our crew to be able to start up on a moment's notice. We're
and maybe take the people, because I understand how it actually works and how the PWA is making money and able to afford a chairman and a tour manager, a couple other people that work for you. So basically, is it correct that you sell events to organizers, you sanction, or you work with organizers and you sanction those events, and that's the way the PWA makes money and is able to afford staff and just basically day-to-day operations?
I mean, very, very openly, and I think this is perhaps an interesting one for the general public to understand, because for whatever reasons, and I don't know if it's a lot, but for whatever reasons, we do get a lot of criticism. You see it on Facebook, and I think people don't understand how we function. So maybe that's our fault in not communicating it better, or if we need to communicate that to the general public or not. But I mean, basically what we are is we are a tour organizer where we sanction events. So in order to be a sanctioned PWA event, you have to meet some criteria regarding prize money and sailor standards, which include things like free accommodation for the top 16 men, top 8 women, transportation from the airport, meals,
prize money,
storage for equipment, the prize money. There's a whole list of things to do. There's a whole list of requirements for an event to become to be sanctioned by the PWA and become part of the PWA tour. So our job is to try to get those events to come to the PWA tour and get them to fulfill all those requirements and to develop this tour. But we actually don't own the events, which makes it a complication for us in terms of being able to secure a tour sponsor. Because I think, for example, if you look at the surfing tour, I think they own most of their events, and they're structured in a much different way. I think they have, it's not an organization run by sailors or surfers. It's actually run by professionals, I think. They have investments. They have huge amounts of money invested into the tour, whereas we're completely self-sufficient. We're generating our income. Our income comes from 3 different places. It's from organizing events and the sanctioning fees we get from the organizers. We have membership fees from the sailors, and we have membership fees from the industry, and that makes up our budget, which is minimal compared to another similar sport, which is surfing. Surfing's budgets are probably 10, 15, 20 times what we have right now.
Do you think it would be time to think about going to a model run more corporate by, like you say, professionals and media agency? You guys or we as a sport got burned one time doing that, but at the the years that they have been running it were good. And just because you got a bad experience with one blonde doesn't mean you can't date blondes for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, I won't talk about blondes like that, but yes, in a way, yes, it's going to be interesting to see how surfing does, because my understanding of it now is they got a lot of funding for 2 or 3 years, and they're trying to make it stand on its feet by its own. But my understanding of it is that they're not, as a business model, that's successful right now. As a business means that they're losing money and they're having to invest quite a bit of money into it. Whereas we haven't been that way. We've been actually successful in either breaking even or being able to put some money into our reserves year after year. So we need to grow. We need to find smart ways of growing, and I'm not 100% convinced that we can go back to that other model.
If you're not the president, if you're not the democratic president, if you're a dictator, what do you do? What are your steps?
Invest more in media. So basically,
being a dictator doesn't make you richer than being a president.
No, it means reallocating funds. So the way the PWA is being run right now is the biggest amount of money we're getting is getting reinvested to its shareholders, which are the sailors, through prize money. So, and this will probably make me the president for the last year, but in reality, what we need to do is take whatever money we make and put it into media. And one of the things we're looking at for 2021 season is a way to generate a bigger media package, which is going to mean reallocating those funds that we are receiving.
From prize money, basically putting a part or all or whatever, some amount of the prize money into media.
Reduce cost as much as we can in terms of how we're running things, and we've reduced it to the point that what we have left to reduce is the prize money. To say this publicly is not normally something I would do, but I think what we need to do is reallocate some of that prize money and put it into media. And we need to do that for probably a couple of years, create enough value in there that it actually makes it much more interesting for organizers to put on the events, to be able to not only secure the necessary budgets to put on the events, but to secure enough budget to actually make a business out of it. And so I think that's where we're falling short right now, is we're not able to provide the possibility to have a very successful economic model for the organizers. And I think once we're able to do that, securing more events, then we can start securing more funding back to the sailors, but right now we're stuck. We've been stuck in the last 15 years. We've averaged something like 11 events per season. I think the lows have been 9 events per year. The highs is something like 13 events per year. But we need to get more events, number one, especially for freestyle, more for waves. We need to go down, we need to be able to have the money to go have more down the line wave sailing events. We need to go to Cape Verde. We need to go to some of the South American breaks, some of the Pacific breaks. There's a lot of stuff we can do in the sport. We know what to do. We know how to do it. We just don't have the money to do it. And I think that's an incredibly frustrating part of our job. And we read all the time the criticism on Facebook, guys saying, "Are you stupid? How come you're not going to this venue or that venue? How come this onshore European stuff and blah, blah, blah." But, the reality, what we're facing is the lack of funding. So it's quite funny to read all these things that are just, a fourth grader could figure out. But without the money to do that, it's quite difficult. We just can't pull it off. And this is our big challenge. So we need to, in reality, restructure how we're operating as an association, which is a challenge because I'm not a dictator, because we are dealing with an association that is somewhat democratically run. So in order to implement some of these changes, I have to convince not only the management board, but also the sailors. But we got to decide as an association also, are we satisfied with the tour we have, or do we need to make changes? So we're making small incremental changes, but I see over the last 15 years, it's not, if we gauge by the number of events we have, the lack of tour sponsorship, we need to fundamentally change our working model. And I think looking at the situation with the world right now, it's not going to get easier. And maybe it's a good time to actually hit the reset button and be a little bit radical in terms of how we need to approach the tour. And I think, in the past, I've had ex-sailors come to me and say, "Jimmy, 0 prize money, get the events on tour, let the sailors, give them an opportunity to actually get outside sponsorship. Because if you only have 3 or 4 events per discipline per year, that's not legitimate enough to go out and approach sponsors." So the
problem with that is that and this is the back, obviously the pushback you're going to get from the sailors is that transition is going to take a while the guys on the top.
This is
top,
the big problem.
And even for me, for quite a few years, prize money been a significant income. So the budgets are so tight that you're counting kind of every 1,000 euros you can get. So yeah.
Yes, and this is the big challenge. We realize there's going to be a lag between. It's almost like the current sailors are going to make a sacrifice for the future sailors, so to speak. What I won't propose to take all the prize money away, but I think the smart thing to do now is we're currently in discussions to upgrade our media package, let's call it, to do different things with the media package that we believe will be able to create better exposure for all of us.
What are you targeting? Are you targeting TV, or are you targeting more online, or are you targeting, I don't want you to give out everything, but what do you think is what
we need to have per event We need to have good social media. So good coverage on our Instagram, our Facebook pages. We need to have our basic live ticker. We need to have our live stream. We need to have end of day reports. We need to have an end of day summary for YouTube, for example. We need to have a news distribution system that goes out to mainstream media news channels for evening television broadcast news. And we need to generate a show about the event, you know, so a professionally produced show about the event. This is something that can then be distributed to both television and online media, however, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? So
yeah, like online, either television or online television, let's say.
Or both, you know. I call it a TV show, but it's not technically solely for television. You know, imagine something like that goes on Netflix, like you've managed to do with your broadcast, yeah?
Just to fill in everybody that there was April's Fools, obviously, and I have my little YouTube show or channel or whatever, and I put that it's going to go on Netflix, and pretty much 80% of the people bid on that. They were like, I got so many, I've never, not the best, like, result brought me this many congratulations.
Yeah.
You know, like text and people I didn't even know, like,
yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I mean, so I think we need to create that content. We need to, you know, there's numerous services when you're producing when you go to an event, and we need all of them.
Jimmy Diaz, a man with a plan. We've been talking for hours now. Let's wrap it up with just a couple quick hitters. A section we ask everybody: what are your pet peeves, and why is it Donald Trump?
Oh man, pet peeves is definitely dishonesty. So I think that covers that whole thing right there. I'm struggling, you know, not to get political about the whole situation, but I'm struggling tremendously with obviously I'm American, but I'm struggling tremendously with the political situation in the US, and I find it incredibly disheartening that we're in the position that we are, and having such a fight with understanding from our own government what's true, what's not true, and I'm just completely disgusted by it, you know. And I hope things change very quickly here in the very near future. But that's definitely one of my pet peeves.
How many times a day do you pee your wetsuit on average?
Oof. I'm old school. I don't.
You know, there's only two types of windsurfers, right? One that pee their wetsuits, and the other ones that don't admit it. Your top 5 windsurfers all time.
Top 5 windsurfers all time. I'll go with Bjorn Antoine. I like Ricardo a lot, you know, for sailing. I think Josh Angulo for raw natural talent. I think that the two, in terms of raw talent, the two sailors I see that are the most talented, or that I've seen in the sport, is Josh and Ricardo. Antoine and Bjorn, and who else?
Yeah, one more.
I think Sarakita. What she's done is incredible. You know, I'm very, very impressed with her.
That's a great top 5. Most underrated windsurfer of all time.
Most what?
Underrated windsurfer of all time.
Ooh. You know, there's a guy that used to sail way back, an Australian guy called Tom Ludicky. And this guy was an incredible talent, and he just kind of disappeared. But he was right up there with everybody. And so, I mean, he was one of the. I remember doing some of my first events out in the Gorge and in San Francisco, and this guy was just killing it. And somehow he disappeared. So in the old days, I think somebody like that. Nowadays, probably Maciek Rutkowski.
There you go. You think that question is made for me? No. Okay, whatever. If you had to sail one spot every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Shit. I don't think I can answer that. You know, there's so many places. I love sailing, for example, at Hokipa.
But
I love sailing in Alachate here, you know, and those are complete opposites. You know, there's no place flatter than Alachate, for example. And, you know, I love wave sailing over there. And then there's other places in the Virgin Islands, sometimes sailing between St. Croix and Buck Island. It's just unbelievably beautiful and just kind of brings me back to my childhood sailing days and things like that. So I couldn't nail it down to one place.
Worst excess baggage bill or check-in story for that matter. But
check-in story would be too long to tell, but it basically involved being stuck in Athens airport for a couple of hours with no money, no possibility of getting the equipment on the flights, which was, if I remember correctly, something like 64 pieces or 30 some pieces that were split between myself, Micah, Sam Ireland, Robert Territao might have been there, something, but somehow I got stuck carrying everybody's equipment. Everybody left the airport. The airline refused to check it in, and I couldn't get out of there because nobody would take that many bags in one flight. So I got stuck there for several days, a couple days, I think, before somebody took mercy on me. But the highest bill I ever got was for something like 32,000 Deutschmarks at the time, which probably close to $20,000, something like that, which we didn't pay. We ended up buying another ticket from another airline that charged us $5,000 or $6,000, something like that. Also for a ridiculous amount of equipment.
What's the furthest you have ever traveled specifically to see a girl?
Exactly halfway around the world from Hawaii to Turkey.
There you go. Most coffees you had in a day?
Probably about 10.
Who was or is your worst competitor? The guy to always just give you problems.
I got to say, one of the guys I hated being in a heat with is Josh Angulo. I just hated that. I would be like, the pin end is favored. There's Josh at the pin end. You know what? I'm not going to the pin end today. You know, he was one guy I could never figure out how to feel confident on the race course with, you know. Just
a very dominating presence on the start line, let's say.
On the start line and on the race course, you know. So it was he was always one that would distract me, let's say, you know. It's a lot of race. Most of the time when I go to the start line, I know who's there, but I don't focus on them individually. It's like, oh, that's Antoine, or, you know, that's whoever it is. But with Josh, I'm like, shit, that's Josh, you know, and that would be a distraction for me.
One movie everyone should watch.
Movie?
Yeah.
Shawshank Redemption. That's a good movie. And it finishes in St. Croix.
I didn't know that, actually.
Last scene. That's St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. Virgin Islands, nice.
And last but not least, who do you want to hear on the podcast?
Who do I want to hear on the podcast? Ooh. What do you mean, windsurfer?
Whoever from the windsurfing world, pretty much.
I got my wife here shouting out names. Huh? Who would be an interesting talk? We should get Rich out here. We should get Rich Page on the podcast. He's gonna hate for saying that.
He's never gonna agree. Maybe we can get John Carter. Maybe we can get John Carter working.
John Carter would be absolutely fantastic to get on the podcast. John is a great. That would be a great interview.
Yeah.
You know, a guy that's seen the whole sport through behind his lens. You know,
Yeah,
that's who you need to get on the podcast. That's a great one. Yeah,
we'll work on that. Okay, Jimmy,
Yeah.
thank you for your time. It's been a ton of stories from 30 plus years, 35,
Yeah.
almost 40 years in the sport. Take care, stay safe, and see you on the water somewhere.
yeah. Thank you, Maciek, and keep doing what you're doing. You know, I think looking at it now from this perspective, as 30 years or all that, and I remember you coming on tour, sleeping inside some of the sailor tents, and going through the real struggle of trying to become a professional windsurfer, and seeing how you're doing now, you know. And I think you've actually become quite a good example, you know, for a lot of up and coming sailors and kids watching. You're doing a great job with all your media. Your results are coming in, and you're doing all the right things. So, you know, without sounding condescending, I'm proud of you. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
And we'll see you on the water hopefully soon. Yeah.
Yeah, take care, Jimmy.
And have some respect for me if you see me out on the race course too.
I do. You know, I always race respect.
Right on, Maciek. Take care.
What? You made it to the end? Of course you made it to the end. I told you he was an interesting bloke. El Presidente, he knows his stuff. He knows his stuff. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the podcast, good or bad. We're loving to hear the feedback. Also, who you want to see in future podcasts. That's what we want to know from you guys. We've had a few names crop up. And don't worry, Thomas Traversa has already been on the phone. Yes, he is coming up in future weeks. But for next week, we've got a special guest. Yes, we've got a 2-time world champion. Once in freestyle, once in wave. Absolute ripping at the moment over in Maui. It is, of course, Marcilio Brown, and that is a good chat. I can swear to that. Also, if you want to click on previous podcasts, I'll stick the links up here. Give us a thumbs up, like if you liked it, and don't forget there's like a beer money link there. I'm me, Maciek, Alfie. It's thirsty work, this, I tell you. It's thirsty work. Thanks for the support, guys, and we'll see you soon.